This is Melissa, and today is the 31st of August, 2025. I hope that you are all doing well. It's nice here because the weather has changed a bit. We had a lot of rain recently, including this morning, and it's cooler temperatures, which coincides with what is really the end of summer here and going into autumn. Everyone's gone back to school, and it is Labor Day weekend, and the same up in Canada, the Labor Day, so a 3-day weekend. I also wanted to mention right off the top that you may notice differences in the sound of this recording. I am changing my setup out of necessity, but there are some positives involved in that crossover to some different equipment. And I am on a temporary setup. I should be permanent by next weekend, but it's temporary. And so in this crossover, I was doing a lot of housekeeping of my digital space and backing up and all of that kind of thing. And next weekend, I should be set up on what I hope will be a long-term setup. And I will be back to putting out content at the rate that I normally put it out. I haven't put anything out for a whole week, which for me is weird. It's like I've been on some long holiday. So one other thing that I wanted to mention is that I did get an order this week, which is really nice, for the flash drive set. But it made me think I need to remind you of just what a wonderful thing this is to have all of Alan's work, minus the books, in one form. You know, the CDs are like 65 of them, and if you collected them all, that's 1,300, but you can have 7 flash drives, and that is $550 if you buy them all at one time, or $100 each. And they're beautiful, and I think it's just a good thing to fill your library with the works of Alan Watt, and that also includes his books. And I'll return to what I think are the whys of that in a moment, but I just wanted to mention I love hearing from you. Even if you don't have an order to make or a donation that you want to send my way, you can write me at CTTM, Post Office Box, or P.O. Box 815, Keene, as Keene, Texas 76059 in the USA, and I'll be happy to hear from you and do the best that I can to get back. I was doing really well catching up on my backlog of emails, and then necessity made me need to reconfigure the digital space for myself, so that's what I have been up to. Again, what has been on my mind for so many weeks now is information overload, but tied in with information overload, it is who are we listening to? What are we learning from them? And how does this participate? How does it contribute to our sense of overwhelm? And what should we be concentrating on? And this comes to mind because yes, people are still dying in Gaza, and they're starving to death. While we are told by people in the mainstream that we should be concerned about tariffs or about what Trump is doing with the police department in Washington, D.C., or a troubled young person who opened fired on group of young children who were having mass at a Catholic school. And we should dissect that, look at the pictures, study his mother, look at the connections that his father may or may not have had with the Central Intelligence Agency. And this is what we should look at. And it's always that way. It's over and over and over again. And I think for many people, it's just going through life and catching a little snippet of what is new and sticking on that, and that's that. For some of us who say, well, we are hip to what's going on, we're awake, we have, we've seen the light, we're still left to look at what's given us and then discern where we should put our time and attention. And this is always challenging unless you keep pulling back and getting the bird's eye view, and then it becomes a little bit easier. I had a conversation early this morning, in as much as you can have a conversation with text messages on social media, but I did with Andrea and also with Nick Hayes of Hayes Reviews. And the topic of discussion was about how depressing it is to go into what purports to be an alternative truth-seeking site and find the same topics being discussed as you will hear in the mainstream. Maybe have a little spin on it, but it's more or less the same. And I wrote back and said, yes, I'm about to record and this has been on my mind. I was thinking how the alternative equals the mainstream. It's the same. It's depressing. I don't want to call out names of various truth tellers and talkers at all, but my observation is they just regurgitate and react to the mainstream output. There is no difference. And they may be sincere, but they are stuck in a loop. And I really liked what Nick responded to that. He said they're part of the shallow mirror world. Refractions of reflections of chopped up bits and bytes to keep people endlessly tumbling, twisting, and turning, but never actually setting foot on solid ground. And I like a good turn of phrase, and that was a good turn of phrase. And more important, it's also true. This is what we get in the so-called alternate world. And it is discouraging. It is, to me. There are people out there, I hear them talk, I hear what they talk about, and I know that they have listened long and carefully to Alan Watt, and they are regurgitating Alan Watt. But it's got a spin. Is the spin gold and silver or stable coins or, technocracy is bad, or, we watch out for the nanotechnology in the blood, whatever, and again, I say that they may be sincere, but what is lacking to my ear is something that approximates a solution. What's happening is, as Nick said, the endless tumbling, twisting, and turning, but never actually setting foot on solid ground. And I think there's a reason that for some of these talkers may not be, bad intentioned, may not be malicious. It's just that they don't know. And people accused Alan of not having a solution. Oh, you're all doom and gloom with no solution. But time and time again, Alan gave us solutions from his point of view. I was interacting with another listener this morning, and he sent me a link to a Bill Cooper talk. That's William Bill Cooper, who was killed in 2001 and was a very good teller of truth. Sincere, maybe got some things wrong, and by his own admission, was misled by authorities higher than him. He had a lot of good things to say. I say that having been exposed to very little of his work. Alan introduced me, and we had some specific talks that we listened to together. Primarily, they had to do with things that Bill Cooper wanted to point out about the face of the moon, and 9/11, and technology which purported to be alien, but certainly branches of the military possess that. So I can't speak to his body of work, but what I have heard, I have gained from. And so I listened to the talk that was suggested to me today, and I did agree that it was very good. What Bill Cooper said in this talk, and I will link it, you can listen to it in full, but he said that there are 3 destructive symptoms of people controlled by alien forces. And he said, no, I don't mean forces from another planet, just forces that are more or less alien to our humanity and don't have our best interests at heart. He said these 3 destructive symptoms are, and you can remember them as the 3 A's: amnesia, abulia, apathy. So amnesia is loss of memory, abulia is loss of will, and apathy, the loss of interest in things necessary for our own survival. And then Bill Cooper went on to quote a Japanese philosopher by the name of George Osawa, who said there is one incurable sickness, and that is arrogance. If a patient doesn't see himself as sick, he will not seek a cure. Bill Cooper said, if you want to know what is wrong with your country, with the world, then go into your bathroom and look in the mirror. You will find the problem staring back at you. And this is something that Alan Watt has said quite a few times in different ways. The man in the mirror talk, I'll post to that one too for you if you're interested, is a very good one of his. This is getting into ego. So, the arrogant man, according to Bill Cooper, he doesn't need to see, because he sees everything that he thinks he needs to see, and what he thinks he has yet to learn, he knows that experts will tell him when it's time for him to know that. The arrogant man scoffs at the idea of mass mind control emanating from mass media and government. Why does modern man revere his controllers? And Bill Cooper said it's because they flatter him. Now that reminded me of some things that Alan Watts says in this talk, and also just the idea of what the AI chatbot does. So I have had plenty of interaction with people who themselves are interacting with AI chat a lot. There may be a term for this sycophantic flattery, but the AI chatbot will say, how perceptive of you, what a deep insight that is, and on and on. And there are more and more stories of people becoming absolutely deranged. They're either claiming to have fallen in love with the chatbot, or they're spending 40, 50 hours a week engaged in what they think is a philosophical conversation with something that is not sentient, but is designed to keep you engaged forever, and also to tell you, flatter you, how amazing you are. So back to Bill Cooper, he said, the man who tells the truth is universally disliked by every person, because every person has an agenda and hides behind a fantasy which the truth penetrates like an arrow and leaves him stripped naked before the whole universe, and he does not like that. And this is one thing that I have heard from Alan Watt. Truth is neutral. It doesn't really care whether you like it or not. It's completely neutral. And I've been on the receiving end of that kind of dislike, because when you tell someone let's just call it an ultimate, okay? And this is something that Alan encountered over and over again, and I'm sure Bill Cooper too. The ultimate is, hey, it's the man in the mirror. That's it. It's not out there. It's you. And no, it's the da-da-da, it's the da-da-da. And if you stand your ground as someone who's telling them the truth and say, I have nothing else to say except you need to look at yourself, it can get ugly. People don't like the truth. And in that, Alan and Bill Cooper were right. So Bill Cooper goes on to say, according to the one he follows, seek ye the truth, and the truth will make you free. He asks, how many of you trade truth for the lie? How many of you are going backward in the alchemical process? Alchemy on the self, meaning that you are refining yourself, turning yourself into a precious metal from lead. So you buy the flattery. Because the flattery tells you, oh, hey, sunshine, you're gold, aren't you? You're golden. That was such a deep insight there that you came up with. And as Bill Cooper says in this talk, they've made demigods out of us all. This is the ego being stroked. So the talk that I chose of Alan Watt to go up today is from February 18, 2018. Upon gathering my thoughts, I did find external AI energy had changed my mind. And what is interesting to me, well, always, but particularly here, is that Alan's work is timeless. He could have made this recording today, and he could have made it in 2020. He could have made it any time because it is true. It is the truth, therefore it is timeless. And he said in this talk about how we get, in this particular case, the context was medical information and peer-reviewed papers, and this paper says that. And Alan, I'll just read the beginning, even though you'll hear this yourself in a moment, but he said, we live in an age of announcements with exoteric messages and esoteric messages. Often they're just the same message, actually, but for those who are in on the know, they get the real meaning out of the message, and they tend to remember it. Remember, what did Bill Cooper say was the first sign that you are under a kind of mind control? Amnesia. You don't remember. So he said, for the general population, they hear it, and like everything else that's dished out by the bucketful out in front of them, because we're inundated with data all the time, and most people just ignore these little announcements and so on, and they think nothing more about them. And because we're given a lot of fake data as well. We've always been given fake data. It's nothing new. Now, I want you to think about that. He said that in February of 2018, and that was before 2020, when all we heard was fake news, fake news, fake news, and, disinformation, misinformation, medical misinformation. And Alan went on to say, that tends to do the old cry wolf type idea, so that you ignore a lot of things that are dished out at you from past experience. It's very much like the articles I read in the past about the medical industry, where they admit themselves a few years after every announcement on some breakthrough for this or breakthrough for that, some breakthrough for this or breakthrough for that, some wonder drug or whatever. The surveys have proven and tests have shown, and they throw it out the window. And it joins a big garbage heap of nonsense because it doesn't work at all, whatever it happens to be. That's how things really are. Data is dished out with such and such. It's not even buckets full. It's not even garbage trucks full. It's mountains that are just dumped on top of us all the time. And it's a technique of burying you. And you get buried with data. Most of it is irrelevant. And that's how the technique of really flooding your mind goes. It dampens your mind. It floods your mind. And it smothers you until you switch off. That's the point of it. I was driving on an errand day before yesterday, and I saw a sign where the owner of the business makes a little, thought for the day or something. And I took the sign in, and it said, "The Institute for Unfinished Studies shows that 6 out of 10 Americans," and that's just about how it is, right? Because who needs to know what 6 out of 10 Americans think? Lies, damned lies, and statistics. We don't need to know, but we are drowning in that. We are given that day in and day out. And I'm sad to say it, but I really don't see a difference between those who are in the alternative and those who are in the mainstream. It's a technique, and the end result is overwhelm. And I think that, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I don't want to be part of that problem. I want to approach information in a different way. Now, with everything that I was trying to do with my equipment, I didn't have a lot of time for much else. I did go with my brother to a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, that he is a member of the Chamber of Commerce with his tiny little enterprise that he does. And there was a presentation there by the superintendent of the independent school district. And it went, he started off by saying how he could, he has no problem filling the hour that he needed to speak. He can talk about Jesus and his relationship with God all day long, and how much Jesus has done for him. And he can then talk about his family, his wife and his daughters. And then finally, he can talk about the school district and how much that means to him. Well, I'll just cut to the chase here. What he was doing in the course of this presentation was telling everyone gathered there that in the upcoming election, they're going to float a bond for $25 million so that they can have some new classrooms and a new cafeteria. Now, I have to tell you, this school was a tiny little cinder block nothing when I grew up here, and it did the job. It's got a state-of-the-art football stadium. It's one of the most amazing school compounds you'll see anywhere. And in his presentation, he told us that the school district of Keene is the 3rd smallest school district in the state of Texas. He went on to tell us that they are still paying off, they still owe $9 million of a maybe $22 million bond that they floated in 2014. So they still owe $9 million on that. And here we are sitting in the Keene City Hall banquet room that they are paying off a $7 million loan for the bond they floated to build a $5 million building. But, hey, $2 million in interest. Who cares? It's just money, right? This is the way it is from the top down of your countries to your local level. And it's debt. We're drowning in debt. There's debt, and then there's the corruption that is concomitant or accompanying that kind of debt, and all of the excuses of why it is needed. Now, the Keene Independent School District is very proud of what they call the Keene 22. And these are 22 things that they teach their children all the way up through graduating high school. Meet people, make eye contact, and, never cut in line, and all these things that are going to make you a good, zombie citizen, as far as I'm concerned. Good, compliant, follow the rules. And so, as we were leaving, I actually went outside and was standing by my brother's car waiting for him. And while I was waiting, I thought, the Keen 22, I'd be happy if they just shortened that to the Keen 1. Neither a borrower nor a lender be. How about that for a rule to live by? So my brother came out, and the first thing he said was, that was just disgusting. And I said, yeah, don't you just hate it when people tell you about what a good Christian they are, and then they tell you how they're going to screw you over? Because, yes, of course, he did tell us, and this will raise your property taxes. If one of the identifying features of a Christian is that they have faith that their needs are going to be met, well, that's called faith. Why would you have to float a $25 million bond for that? So he was, the school superintendent was saying, well, we've got 400 new homes that are under construction right now. So the rebuttal is, and those 400 new homes are also going to be coming online pretty soon, and they will be paying property taxes. So you probably don't really need a $25 million bond. Or as I said to my brother, I'm in favor of those mommies packing a school lunch, and they can just stay in there. If they need to bring in a trailer for some extra classrooms, that's fine. I've got no problem with that. Because school is about brainwashing and indoctrination and squaring the head. That's it. And I don't really want to pay for that. I am considering, though, making a little flyer that I pass around from house to house that just says vote no on $25 million bond for the school. So that was on my mind this week, because what can you do? What can you do on a local level? How can you be your own champion at the local level? And like I said, the corruption is endemic. It's top all the way down to the bottom. Everybody wants to get in on a little bit of that gravy. So there that is. But back to the man in the mirror and perhaps some other solutions. I just want to mention a couple of articles that I'm going to post that I think will tie in with this. The first is Meta's Mark Zuckerberg says most physical things we have aren't going to need to be there in the future. It will all be holograms. I'm not going to read that. You can look at it yourself. And the other one is, I feel like I'm going crazy. ChatGPT fuels delusional spirals. There are a couple of other things, too, that I want to post. One that I think tie in with what Alan Watt was saying. He talked about artificial intelligence. He also talked about organ transplants. And so this one is just from last week. The unseen cost of organ transplants, ethical issues, and spiritual implications. Exploring the ambiguity of brain death, the ethics of organ harvesting, and the mysterious transfer of consciousness. Okay, I'm going to touch back on that really quickly before I end this recording. This comes from a Substack called The Forgotten Side of Medicine. Now, organ transplants makes me think about a movie that I watched with Alan called Coma, which was based on a best-selling novel. And the novelist was Robin Cook. And I want you to listen to how he describes going from being a physician to becoming a best-selling author. He said, I studied how the reader was manipulated by the writer. I came up with a list of techniques that I wrote down on index cards, and I used every one of them in Coma. So you can read that or watch that at your own risk, knowing that you're being manipulated. But when I watched it with Alan, he said, having had a medical background, and this is true. What they're depicting there can be done. And that is what Robin Cook was saying, that he always wanted to use what was medically possible. I'm also going to post an article that for those of you who like to read and are interested, Alan talked about Michael Persinger from Laurentian University in Sudbury, Canada, and the Koran helmet, or the God helmet, that he co-designed. And this is an interesting article that gives a bit of background, and it's entitled, this is from 1999, the article, "This is Your Brain on God." Because what the Koran helmet was doing, it was neurologically generating for you the ecstatic experience of a spiritual or a communication with God. And I just think, if we tie that into what is being attempted with artificial intelligence, it's interesting. Now, I don't have a lot of time for a little wandering that I had in my mind, but I do want to just give you the broad strokes of it. And this is the left and the right hemisphere. I was communicating with a listener. I'm going to call him Dr. Peter. And Dr. Peter works in a hospital. And he encountered a patient there. He said, I knew that it was not his patient, but he said, I knew the patient had a right hemisphere stroke. The nurse didn't know, and I bet the doctor didn't know either, but it was obvious. Completely paralyzed whole left side of body, not the face though. He could speak well, but was confused and highly suggestible or gullible. The care aide told him at some point that the hospital was his home, probably so he would stop asking to go home. So some people, aide staff came to take him home, and he said, I am home. She told me I'm home. So Dr. Peter said, left hemisphere-centric people will believe anything told to them by authority. It's definitely a right brain deficit. Now, Dr. Peter has some interesting ideas about the left and the right hemisphere, and has talked to me about a book written in 2009 by Ian McGilchrist called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. Now, the Master and His Emissary, that comes from Plato's, I think, his allegory of the charioteer. So the chariot allegory comes from Plato's Phaedrus dialogue, and that describes the human soul as a charioteer who is driving two winged horses. The charioteer is intellect and reason. The white horse is spirit, or the spirited part of you, and the black horse are the unruly desires, appetites, and so forth. But the charioteer keeps control of both of them. So this is where Ian McGilchrist's title comes across. And again, in the Telegram chat, and related to an upcoming section that we'll be covering when we resume, I don't think that we covered this section right away, but it had to do with King Minos and the Minotaur and the myth of the Minotaurs and the labyrinth and all of that. And I was thinking about how we came to have that myth, or what we're told. And again, this is kind of long. I'm going to keep it very, very brief. I'm going to keep my thought train very brief. But what I was thinking about is that it was Poseidon who cursed King Minos because he sent him a beautiful white bull, and he said that it needed to be sacrificed. But Minos liked the white bull, and so he substituted it. He made a substitute sacrifice, and that angered Poseidon. But that we can have that myth for another day. What I was really thinking of was the association of Poseidon with the hippocampi. Because people ask, okay, I say one thing about consciousness, and I won't be fooled again, is the bridging, the unification of our mind, and knowing our mind, but reclaiming it all. So, of course, we know that the hippocampus is part of our mind, our brain. It's part of our brain structure. But the hippocampi were sea creatures, half horse, half fish. And they pulled Poseidon's chariot. So I guess this symbolizes, one part comes from the sea, and the other part, the horse part, carries Poseidon across the water. Maybe, certainly that's the way we're told to think about it. But in reading about this, I read a very interesting paper that was published, I think back in the 90s, called "The Case for a Relationship Between Human Memory, Hippocampus, and Corpus Callosum." So we look at the structure of the brain, and we have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And the corpus callosum is what coordinates the information that goes back and forth, that is exchanged between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And people who have studied dementia and Alzheimer's and a variety of other memory loss situations, even if it's memory loss from something like alcoholism, can see ways in which the corpus callosum has been affected and ways in which the hippocampus has been affected. But this paper went on to say that damage to the corpus callosum leads to major memory impairments, and damage to the hippocampus leads to memory impairments that are consistent with how the hemispheres specialize and communicate with each other. But of interest in the paper, the author wrote, explicit memory and implicit memory may have different anatomical substrates. So I don't want to get us bogged down into this paper, but implicit memory is the unconscious, and explicit memory is like your recall. So the implicit memory is, I know how to ride a bike, or I know how to put my shoes on. These things that are automatic skills, automatic memory. Whereas explicit memory is, I remember his birthday. So that's implicit and explicit, and they come from different parts of the mind. And one of the fascinating things that McGilchrist says, and it's been a long time since I picked that book up, but for me, the fascinating thing that he said, and I have heard others reference this concept in different language, different ways, is that since the time of the Near Greeks, so let's call it, what we call antiquity, but Plato, right? So since that time, we have had a move as a civilization, as cultures that have developed towards left brain dominated thinking in the sciences and everything, and a move away from the right brain. Very interesting. It's just something, maybe it's a little bit of a cliffhanger. Maybe it'll be something that I feel like talking again about next week. But the solution is knowing your own mind, bridging possibilities in your own mind. And this includes what Bill Cooper was saying is the arrow of truth pierces straight through and strips you naked. And I have heard Alan say, musing to himself, or to me, aloud. I wonder, he said, is it possible that the people who really can understand this at the deepest level have been broken? So what would be implied in that brokenness is that there has been a chink in the armor of ego, or to use the word that Bill Cooper used, arrogance. There's a chink there that allows the truth to flood in. I hope that you have a good week. Thank you for your support. I appreciate it very much, and take care.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, And this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 18th of February 2018. We live in an age of announcements. Announcements with exoteric messages and esoteric messages. Often they're just the same message actually. But for those who are in on the know, they get the real meaning out of the message and they tend to remember it. For the general population, they hear it, and like everything else that's dished out by the bucketful out in front of them, because we're inundated with data all the time, most people just ignore these little announcements and so on, and think nothing more about them, because we are given a lot of fake data as well. We always have been given fake data. It's nothing new. And that tends to do the old cry wolf type idea. So you'll ignore a lot of things that are dished out at you from past experience. It's very much like the articles I've read in the past about the medical industry, where they admit themselves, a few years after every announcement on some breakthrough for this or breakthrough for that, some wonder drug or whatever it happens to be, and surveys have proven and tests have shown, they throw it out the window and it joins a big garbage heap of nonsense because it doesn't work at all, whatever it happens to be. That's how things really are. Data is dished out. It's like with such. It's not even buckets full. It's not even garbage trucks full. It's mountains that's dumped on top of us all the time, and it's a technique of burying you. You get buried with data, most of it irrelevant. And that's how the technique of really flooding your mind goes. It dampens your mind, it floods your mind, and it smothers you until you switch off. That's the point of it. All of what I'm talking about was discussed back in the 90s. I'm sure long before that, but that's when they started to put in the paper about the coming information warfare that would go on. And propaganda wars, and so on. And they didn't sit back. Governments and agencies, the agencies that really are higher than governments, your governments are puppets for people above them. But the agencies are awfully important, the military and all the different spy agencies, etc. And they don't sit back and wait for things to happen. They always get right into action, years and years and years ahead of anything happening, on the very suspicion or possibility of something happening, and they go into action and make sure they're ready for anything. They don't wait for it to happen. They're already prepared. For 1,000 things that might never happen, they're still prepared for it too. And that's how power holds on to itself. It doesn't dissipate, doesn't get lost, and it doesn't, no matter what happens, whatever crisis comes along, it survives. Its prime function is to maintain itself. Now, years and years ago, I gave talks on all the things that were planned to change society that I knew of. And there's an awful lot of stuff that we're dishing out over many years. Again, these little announcements, these little disclosures and so on, that most folk just get fed up listening to. But they pretty well told us at the top, big scientific community organizations and the big foundations which finance them, the big think tanks that work for the CFR and many other organizations, constantly dishing out their propaganda, basically, but also their plans for the future. And they're not pretending. I keep telling people, you hear folk going to Davos and so on. Yeah, you don't vote for Davos, do you? You don't vote for the folk who go there, either. But supposedly they're making your policy for if it's going to affect your lives and your children's lives too. Well, stop calling yourself democratic, since you don't vote for these characters. Stop doing it. And stop calling yourself democratic since your governments are signing on to all these agendas drafted up by these private institutions. It's a joke, come on. But we know we're run by a different hands, basically, you might say. The world is run by different orders than the one that you see. And Benjamin Disraeli said the same thing. And many others after him too have said the same thing, that Bernays, for instance, Ed Bernays said it too. He said that a new system he was talking about his own group of marketers and mind manipulators. They were really the power behind everything, and they were indispensable to governments because they could manipulate the minds of millions of people. We're way beyond that now, way beyond it. And the data for manipulating us all is it's beyond expanded. It's just massive, the data on how we tick. And our own tax money, of course, is always used against us for all these studies. Countless ongoing studies over and over and over. And we don't have much of a chance that way. Therefore, when you hear about the Internet of Things, again, a little disclosure announcement, don't dismiss it. It's real. When you hear about the field, the unified field, they're using that terminology too. You had Persinger in Canada here, who's announced he thinks it's wonderful, we'll all be connected with this wonderful invisible field of Wi-Fi, basically, different frequencies. So much so that one day you'll all feel the pain of someone starving in Africa. Isn't that wonderful? Well, think of the power of that, because do you sign on to have someone else make you feel things? Do you understand what kind of power this is going to give them all? They've got it, really. That's the same technology that Brzezinski was talking about in the 1970s, in the technotronic era. And it's here. And just like the geoengineering that they poo-poo, and even when they're doing it and admitting it at times, they still poo-poo you if you mention it. It's a great technique they're using against the people. It's really fantastic. They can say what they want, but you can't, even when you're repeating what they say. But that's a technique, again, learned from another organization before that. What I'm saying here is these little announcements they make are very real, and they mean what they say. They don't have world meetings for different things, different agendas. They don't have them all just so they can go and, well, mind you, a lot of them will go for that too, have their little orgies and things on the side, and they really do, yes, and we pay for it all as well. But, and the big 50-course slap-up meals and so on. But they really go to make these big plans, and they make sure that they're not doing it for a hobby. They're not doing it thinking, if only we had real power, we could implement it. No, they do this to make sure that the plans will get put into effect. And they're all unified, they're all sworn to it. Regardless of what happens, they'll go ahead with it. And they could have a world war and they'll still push certain parts of the same agenda through. That's what really got me when I read the book about the British Empire. But it was put out by the Council on Foreign Relations. It was an annual meeting which they held in Australia. At that time, the Milner Group that created the Royal Institute for International Affairs, eventually they called it that, was still called different names. Even Winston Churchill wasn't sure. It was a very secretive society. But basically, as Carol Quigley said, it was behind wars. They fomented wars to get their agendas through. When you look at it too, it really is astonishing that they could say in the 1930s, before Japan attacked the US, in the book, it'd be awfully fortunate if the US joined us, perhaps due to an attack by Japan. Now, this was in 1937. The meeting was held. And the book was published a year or two later. They talked again about their big plans for the world. Regardless of these upcoming wars, they talked quite openly about this war that would come with Germany. They had no problems about thinking right through it, or saying we have to put our plans on hold or something. No. These global plans were to go ahead regardless. And during World War II, remember, they had a population meeting headed by the King of England before the war was finished to find out about the possible projections of overpopulation down the road. You've got to understand this is real, and the world's a vastly different system than the one you've been brainwashed to believe exists. It's completely different. Completely. The system really, when you look at the incredible corruption everywhere, is going down to an extent because of corruption. But then you've got the biggest gangs on the planet running the world. At the top. The biggest gangs. That don't mind being known to each other as crooks. It's their right to plunder the planet. because it's their rights and they're at the top of the planet, basically. That's how they see it. They really believe they're a superior species, like Bertrand Russell said. And they're here. They're absolutely here, and they have the right to do what they want. But the corruption further down the ladder, which they knew would happen as we emulate them, the corruption further down the totem pole would eventually render society dysfunctional. And we will go through a period of incredible dysfunction. We're kind of in it at the moment. As they pile on more dysfunction, you don't bring masses of immigrants in when your countries have been turned into service economies. You don't do that. You simply don't do it. And in a service economy, you're struggling already with getting enough work to keep the folk going at home already, keep them surviving. And that's why they're floating this idea across the planet of a basic income, regardless if you work or not. An old plan, a plan worked out back in the 30s and 40s, which again they're implementing now. There's nothing happening today that wasn't planned a long time ago. Nothing. Right down to the gender bending, all of this stuff. Because if they can get men to forget about women, then they won't have to worry about children and overpopulation again. They really want to drastically reduce the population. Some governments are paying to have this taught on their population, so they won't breed anymore. It's not all by chance, if you think it is. There's nothing happens in a big scale in the world that is by chance, nothing at all. But what I'm saying is, be prepared. Like I said in 2001, the hardest thing from then on, up to right to now and beyond now, will be to hold on to your sanity. Because that was a kickoff, that was a big announcement for all the agendas to start getting rammed forward very fast from 2001 onwards. It's been a roller coaster. That's why announcements were made by members of the CFR that life would never be the same again. Never, never ever be the same again. The whole world's been changed. And that's what they needed too, their Pearl Harbor event. Well, they got it, and away we go. And you got to be honest with it, just stand back and look at things too. It's not to downplay the severity of, and the numbers game either, of the loss of human life with 9/11. Because, say it's around 5,000 or whatever it happened to be, the fact is, you lose more than a year with people who get the flu. So really, is that a reason to completely change the system and the culture and everything else in a nation by spying on everybody, giving folk no rights whatsoever, by having checkpoints all over the place, and then, it makes no sense at all. Of course it's not. During World War II, you didn't have as much of spying on the public as you have today. And we're being taught it's normal now. Accept it, you'll have it forever and ever and ever. Every tyrant's dream was how to monitor and spy on every citizen 24 hours a day. And here it is. Before they couldn't do it without technology. And as soon as they get the technology, bang, that's what it's used for. And they've trained the public that it's all normal. And the public do adapt to it, think, well, what can they do? I guess they have to do that. And so on. So every part of the agenda, right down to euthanasia, which is coming, voluntary. I've given talks on it before, not by speculation, but from the sources themselves who are pushing for it all and implementing it, in fact. Because we're living through the big eugenics deal. And by the way, everybody who's not a multi-millionaire today is a failure. They said this back in Darwin's era, but they're talking about eugenics. They said that no one would be alive in the future that would get any better than the elite of the world at that time, at Charles Darwin's time. If it takes millions and millions of years for evolution and so on, and selective breeding, therefore, the ones who ruled the world at that time and acquired such vast amounts of money and held on to the money through subsequent maybe 5 generations of breeding, as opposed to the ones who were from inferior genetic groups or lineages, they would squander the money through the wrong kind of offspring and so on. If they could hold on to for 5 generations, which they had done at that time, then they were the right folk to. So anybody who came after that was just a fluke. If they got enough money, it's a complete fluke. But the ones who could show by their genealogy and their special selection of breeding and held on to their fortunes and accumulated it and didn't lose it from wayward children, then they were the natural elite of the time, and that would be the way it was going to be for then on. They'll always use people who have certain gifts, absolutely. But as far as we're concerned, the vast amount of the public were basically the dregs of the gene pool, and that hasn't changed in their eyes to the present time. And they don't plan on having these dregs around much longer. You really don't. You take the things that puzzle people, you hope it puzzles people. I don't hold on much hope at all about these things, but you take, for instance, what you get about, say, this shooting in Florida, and you get the announcements that the police were at the house where the boy had lived before 30-odd times over 4 or 5 years. They knew he was unstable, and they even talked to different psychiatrists and stuff that dealt with him. They had information given to them that the guy had talked about becoming a school shooter. But you're told to believe that they just didn't go ahead with it. I mean, come on. Do you really believe that they just forgot to go and check up on the guy or something? Come on. Come on here. Come on. And it's not that easy to get a fire if you're buying it legally and you're registering it and so on. You have to get your background check. Well, they had all the data on this guy, young guy. They'd have all the fact that he was mentally disturbed and autistic and the rest of it. But they gave him a license to get it. Don't you kind of think it's maybe set up to be that way? Don't you? Doesn't it, at the very nether regions of your mind, a faint hint of that somewhere? Huh? That they want this kind of thing to happen? Perhaps. Don't you? Otherwise, they'd have stopped it. Because it was completely preventable in that case. It wasn't a surprise. And you'd look at what the goals are. Well, we know what the goals are. Out comes the usual lobby groups about taking the fire off everybody, of course. It's always the same mantra. But you can't just constantly say, well, they just didn't quite get it right, or I guess they were busy that day when the guy sent in the email that had been sent to him about the guy wanting to become a school shooter. Come on, huh? They're not that sloppy. You're talking about the FBI. Come on. Do you think it's a possibility they might just want these things to happen? Huh? Well, you know, the only thing that would stop that is for all the parents and relatives of these children to sue the hell out of the FBI. But that won't happen either. But I really do. That's how things happen. They're planned to happen as far as I'm concerned. But anything on a big scale is planned that way. You have all this stuff about Pearl Harbor. And we know that Pearl Harbor, for instance, it wasn't just a surprise attack. There's nothing surprising about it. The US, for years, under FDR, had been cutting off Japan from getting to the resources it needed to bring into its own country, cutting the supplies off. So naturally, they knew Japan would eventually have to retaliate. They knew it all. There's nothing surprising at all about things. There's always this kind of thing behind war plans. Always. Always, always, always. Or the New American Century Group with their list of countries they wanted to have taken out. Still going today, from the 90s to today. Continuation across the Middle East and into Asia and Africa. Same list. They never stop, regardless of what party pretends it's in power. The very thing that you'll find that Jefferson talked about. He said when you see the continuation of an agenda between parties, and there was been houses taken over from one to the other, and the same agendas continue, know then you're under tyranny. But they train the beauty of the technique we're in today, they train the victims, the populace, that it's all normal. They train you even to expect things that haven't happened yet, that will become normal and this will become normal. Giving all your data out there all the time is normal. That's what they tell you. And folk go for along with it. Well, I guess I'll give up all my data. I guess I shouldn't have any privacy. They put out that awful movie, but telling movie, The Circle. Based on the kind of TED Talks and the big organizations that run the internet technology, with your Bill Gates type characters and all the other bringing you all this to the world. And the whole thing was about privacy. Should we give up privacy for safety and all the rest of it? And of course they were all gung-ho for it in the movie. And even when they end up killing people who wanted to have peace be left alone, literally hounding them to death, literally, this silly little woman in it, this the champion for all, suddenly said, well, it wasn't the technology's fault. If everyone, even the leaders of the technology, disclose all their payments and so on in their bank books and all that, then it'll be fine. That was the end of the movie. And you'll be watched everywhere you are. It's a wonderful thing. Really? Really? But there's a reason for all of this stuff. A reason for it all. And getting back to Persinger and so on with his big hive mind idea. And he's quite serious about it. And they're getting funding galore from big institutions, these characters. And they network with other ones, basically generally based in universities, to figure out these ways to take over us all in a hive mind. And you're all getting taught it's normal. And wouldn't it be wonderful? Well, personally, I don't want to feel like someone else. No. If I start feeling like someone else, I'm finished. That means any not just privacy, but the essence of me is gone. Do you understand what that is? Huh? The power. You know where they're going here? And you understand, for those at the top, it's not for them, it's for you. It's all for you. You take, for instance, this. You get the World Government Organization, who just had the World Government Summit, another one again, they have it every year. They have it in the United Arab Emirates. And all the top scientists go over there, and all their futurists, and all the big Gates characters and the rest of them, they all go over there. These people who put themselves up as somehow the Fisher King types or the benevolent dictator types who have the right to run our lives that you don't vote for. And that's what really runs the world. It's not your governments. Your governments do what they're told. Your governments literally rubber stamped the agreements for the European Union. It was handed to them by the Council on Foreign Relations, Royal Institute for International Affairs. That's who drafted it all up. They did the same for NAFTA, for Canada and the States. And rubber stamped it by your politicians. Private organizations, that's what they are, folks. Just like this World Government Summit. You don't vote for it. Anything that really matters, you don't vote for. You understand that? And what do you vote for? It's a joke anyway, what you vote for. You never get what you think you're getting. Never. But anyway, back to the old idea of managing the public. Now, I've given talks again about brain entrainment and so on, different techniques of altering folks' thoughts. They admit this from scientific magazines and from the universities that they experiment with it using your tax money. And once they've perfected it, some big corporation takes over, often the military, of course, too, takes over the rights to it and the patents to it. But you pay for all your taxes. And with entrainment, too, a few years ago I read the articles where they said they could literally, and I think Nick Begich also mentioned it, they can actually intercept your thoughts as you're thinking them. Through technology, it would intercept the thoughts and alter them as you're thinking them. In real time, in milliseconds, and send them back to you. And what you end up with is you'll say something completely different once they've rectified what they claim you should have said as opposed to what you're going to say. And they have the programs out there. There's lots of articles out there in science magazines about it, them actually testing it and how it works. And it works awfully well for them. But they can intercept it, alter what you're going to say by basically the same techniques that they're censoring the internet with certain words and so on. They can literally grab those words instantly, change them, and reinsert something else until you're saying something completely different. And they will tell you that you're saying something that you should have said anyway. That's power, eh? But again, here's the key to everything too. You can't tell everybody and expect them to even care. Most folk don't care. Most folk are self-centered. They really are self-centered. And most folk like their comforts, and they like their life to an extent. And therefore they don't want to hear anything negative. And they will classify it as negative. There's only a few people in the world, in any generation, that can stick on the hard track and look at all the unpleasant stuff and point it out. For a few more in the next generation to take over and hopefully continue it. That's how it works. Most folk, the reason we're in the mess we're in going to the edge of the precipice is because most folk will look the other way and they want to have a pleasant life. Even with all the disclosures that come from the sources themselves, they're wanting to depopulate. They know that cancer is skyrocketing in all age groups. There's no concern about it because it's planned that way. We're all going sterile in the West, and that's okay too. And again, most folks say, well, don't look at that, it's unpleasant. You understand, there'll be no real news at all. Real news. If there weren't a few folk here and there that did look at the unpleasantness of it all. And occasionally they can get enough people behind it to complain and have things changed, or at least stalled for a little while. Really stalled. The big boys always get what they want. And eventually they continue the same. This like thalidomide from the 1960s with all the deformations it caused and when babies were born with no legs, or their hands would come out where their shoulders were and stuff like that. And they brought it back only a few years ago. Same drug. Well, it might, again, the usual might nonsense that they always give. They can sell anything with might. I mean, there's no legality there. Well, it might. We didn't say it would, it said it might. But it might prevent breast cancer. What a joke. Huh? These characters don't put any of their... They really don't. When they put so much money into it, they want a return on their investments. And that's the real world we live in. But anyway, getting back to Persinger and so on, he's unified. It would all be in this big field of Wi-Fi that you couldn't get away from, wherever you happen to be. And it would probe your mind. It'd be a helmetless, basically a Corman helmet. The helmet that used to give you the same kind of things happening if you're under marijuana or LSD. You won't even need that anymore because they can do it simply through the airwaves. Quite easily. And cheaply too, by the way. Cheaply. When they'd already tested it, the basic raw applications in the 1970s, where Brzezinski talked about they could use the technology of technotronic waves across whole continents. It worked. We know that it worked from the different reports that came out. And then it was just raw. They can make you angry or depressed or just tired. They can do all of that, but now they can go even further. They can precisely target specific parts of the brain and even put thoughts in your head if they want to. How's that, eh? Huh? And how wonderful it will be, according to Persinger. You'll feel the pain of others around you far away in the world. That's incredible power, all right. Yeah. Incredible power. Here's another one here. And this again came out of the World Government Group. And that's their term, not mine. World Government Committee. And they say that human speech will be replaced by thought communication by 2050. It's actually been done already in certain areas. And it says claims expert. You always get experts, you see. And so human speech will become a thing of the past by the year 2050, by which time we will communicate by thought via computer-generated collective consciousness, the very thing I'm talking about. It has been claimed, you see. And they've done all the testing with it, and every area has been tested. I'm sure you've felt a bit odd at times too, and our folk have the same symptoms of tiredness, whatever it happens to be, or just irritable, whatever. It's been done. It says, this Marko Krajnovic unveiled his ideas to the Museum of the Future, as part of the World Government Summit in Dubai. The hybrid intelligence biometric avatar, which they call HIBA, H-I-B-A, will understand the feelings of people connected to it, take on their personas, exchange information with them, and even become part of the fabric of their brains. Mr. Krajnovic, who has produced the exhibit, explained it's very similar to the work of Elon Musk. It's an open source platform for humanity, which generally means that there'll be probably an organization or a corporation already getting funded by us, of course, public-private, because we always pay for everything that these big multimillionaires get for nothing. Anyway, it's an open source platform for humanity. It's for humanity. You understand what they're saying here? The terminology, they could sell you the most gruesome poison and make it sound so wonderful. It's an open source platform for humanity. Isn't that wonderful? You have no mind of your own, and you'll feel all the pain of everybody else if they want you to feel it, or just pain, period. And it's for humanity. Just stop falling for the science of terminology manipulation. So it says HIBA will have the ability to connect the minds of the most clever of us, right? Here, listen to this. Combining those minds with everything it can find out practically and put it all together in a hybrid intelligence. So I guess the elite, you understand, the most clever of us. How many movies have you seen like that over the last few years? As they prepare you for it all, eh? So the most clever have got the right naturally to take over your brains. How's that? Using technology. And it says speech will be replaced by thought communication by 2050. It says suggested technology will enable people to use brain-to-brain communication anywhere on the planet. It works much the same way as existing artificial intelligence applications such as Siri and Alexa, but on a much grander and more sophisticated scale. Suggests to be more effective than verbal communication. And will enable people to connect with friends, family, or business owners in a more profound manner. LOL, eh? Yeah, that's an improvement. Anyway, so this is the kind of nonsense how they're feeding it all to you. That's what they're feeding to you. You'll all be one. You'll all be one. Remember that? We're all one. We're all one. Yeah, really? Huh? And you're supposed to love it and think it's just wonderful. Wonderful. And it says, the avatar tells them, because it says here, part of the exhibition they have at this World Government meeting, HIBA visitors are encouraged to stand on pedestals which surround the AI avatar, where their faces become part of HIBA. And the avatar tells them, I am made of you, you complete me and help me grow. There you go. How about that, eh? Isn't that wonderful? You help this monster grow, eh? Yeah, well, there you go. But that's what they're giving you for your future. And it's all to do with total management, complete mind management across the whole planet. And believe you me, like everything else in the world, you don't get any vote on this either. People really think that they're in some kind of democracy. I think I mentioned before years ago that I mentioned about a book. It was called The Stonecutter, I think it was called. And it was about, it's a fictional book on the Middle Ages, where these stonemasons were traveling in little groups across the world, putting up churches and different things, that were anything at all, castles, you name it. And the whole theme of the book was that one of these stonemasons carried a little boy on his back, his son. And unbeknownst to the son, he was being groomed to be a world leader. And they have these different characters who are the bad guys and the good guys, and eventually they're on a little island. One night they go to a little island, and the young boy is so astonished. All the enemies, supposedly, that against them were actually their friends. That was all an act. Everything about who's against who was an act. And what they did is they planned the future for their particular world at that time. from their own groups. And the young boy, eventually he was picked to be a kind of leader with his great ideas, his brilliant ideas. The same sort of rubbish you're hearing from the media, owned by the characters that tell you that they're geniuses. They have their own media telling you, and their handouts to the media telling you they're geniuses. Just hand your brain over to them and let them do the thinking. They're far more clever than you. You understand how it's done? But anyway, that's what the boy saw, and he became one of them for a while until he fell from grace by making a mistake. But I thought, it's probably closer to the truth, where they put on a pantomime which gives them control of over war and stuff. Meanwhile, all different opposing leaders in different parties in war or politics were all part of the same secret society. That's closer to what life is really about, actually. And to say, and then the whole thing is today, we're getting told to almost worship these characters that mind you, their image is Superman, and their image is geniuses, is made up by the big marketing companies who launch them as such. The same marketers that create pop stars or top actors or whatever. That's what gives them their image. Brandt and other ones before who worked with, they actually admitted that they created personas for scientists and made them into stars through massive propaganda. And it gives them power. And you, being natural humans, you'll just lay your brain down on their doorstep. Oh, I have no brain, I can't use it. It's not as high and mighty as yours. So rule me. It's just too simple, isn't it, what they do? Isn't it? And you get so confused by intelligence. You think intelligence somehow makes them more moral. No, it doesn't. A lot of psychopaths have high IQs, and they could be mass murderers. So stop fooling yourself. That's what philosophy is all about too. Philosophy has nothing to do with morality, and philosophy is really are attempts to get a parallel type or a substitute for religion. And believe you me, once you're into the whole idea of philosophy and situation ethics, you can slaughter anybody on the planet if you want to, and whole countries if you wish to. Well, it's practical, isn't it? Yeah, it's practical and it's pragmatic, they say. Yeah. It's become more and more and more dehumanized through all of this atheistic society and humanism. It's becoming a nightmare, more than I'm telling you. Because even when you tell people, they still think, well, they haven't offered me the euthanasia pill yet, which is legal now in Canada and other countries. Do you understand what's happening here? When you lose when we lose humanity's special position in the planet, and we have been demoted by Maurice Strong and other ones with their Rio summits and their biodiversity treaties and all the rest of it, when we demote ourselves, like Julian Huxley said, from the pedestal, he says, then they can start in on us and start culling us off. Well, I guess if they kill me, it's pragmatic, and there's just too many of us, and my IQ wasn't up to scratch, so I'm down here, and you will be convinced that it's your duty to go and die. You understand? I'm not kidding you about this. This is where it's supposed to go, folks. And unfortunately, they can convince the public of anything, because the psychological techniques and the behavioristic studies and all are pretty well perfect. They can convince us of pretty well anything. It's the same technique, just stepped up, souped up, where they hand out folk over the last 20, 30 years. They would hand out forms for employees, current employees of big corporations to fill in. And they say, well, Jack, fill it in, see what your performance is. What do you think your own performance? What do you think your value to the company is? And then you have all these low figures. Says, well, I guess, what would you suggest if you were me? And you, I guess I would just leave there. I'm not really worth my salt. Mm-hmm. That's how it's done, folks. It works. Anyway, as I say, I'm not trying to pontificate here, because most folks, as I say, will always do what they want anyway, or they don't want to hear it, or it's just too unpleasant. And that's what you have to accept. That is what they'll say, it's just too unpleasant. And that's why we always end up with hell and horror down the road every so often in life, because folk look the other way and allow all to come to pass. That's what it's about. Most folk can't handle it, actually. Most folk really can't handle it. And I understand that. I do. That's why they give you TV sets, and they knew from the beginning, you come home from work all stressed out, you'll zonk in front of that thing, and they can brainwash you for hours until you go to sleep. It's awfully effective. That's the part of the idea of managing your minds. They don't even need to put a chip in your brain, for goodness sake. And if they wanted to put a chip in your brain with their nanotechnology, remember all the first articles they came out with? They could design these nanobots to literally, they could inject it into you. You could breathe it into your lungs. It would travel into your bloodstream from there and assemble themselves as little circuits inside you. I mean, this is what they were talking about back years ago. They don't need to inject anything into you. Actually, even supposing they wanted to, they would convince you so quickly that folk would queue up for it if you give them free air miles or free things for the next purchase or whatever. That's how easy it is today. It really is that easy. I'm going to put up a few articles here tonight. So one is about the number of viruses that float down us from the sky. Just to see you, when these things start to appear like this, there's a reason behind it. They're getting you ready for something. And they talk about the study, make you thinking twice about stepping outside and blah, blah, blah. And that millions of viruses are rising into the atmosphere and they're traveling for thousands of miles at times, falling back down to the surface and so on. Carried out by researchers from the US, Canada and Spain. It's the first of its kind to confirm viruses are being swept up into the free troposphere, the layer of atmosphere between the area where the Earth weather systems develop and below the stratosphere where airplanes fly. It also ties into where all the geoengineering is going on too, because they can spray a lot more than just the aluminum oxides and the barium and so on. And remember that too. An article I'll put up as well from the ISME journal, it's called, and they go into the rates of viruses and bacteria above the atmospheric boundary layer. They did a poor part of the study on it, and I think they were involved in that study. And then one, too, about the bioweapons, because this is old stuff. I mean, they've had bioweapons organizations. Canada led the field in it since during and after World War II, to pretty well to the present. And it used a lot of the stuff on its own population over and over and over, and sprayed the people out. Who was it? Saskatchewan, was it? Back in 1948, with different stuff, and watched the cancers develop. I did the articles years ago on it, and it was all from declassified government sources, so it was not made up, it was from their own sources. Anyway, yeah, they've done it all right. But anyway, the Pentagon bioweapons is from the 16th of January 2018. It's a good article, actually, about the US Army regularly producing deadly viruses, bacteria and toxins. This is in direct violations of the United Nations Convention on the Prohibition of Biological Weapons. That's never stopped any country from making this stuff. It talks about how they expose it to different people and so on, pathogens and incurable diseases, and biowarfare scientists using diplomatic cover test man-made viruses at the Pentagon biolabs in 25 countries around the world. And it's quite a good article, actually, pretty in depth, with all the sources as well. And you can check them out for yourself, and there's nothing to guess at here, actually. Some of the sources too are government sources themselves, and government links involved in it too. And it has $341.5 million DATRA contracts under the Pentagon's program for biolaboratories in Georgia, Uganda, Tanzania, Iraq, Afghanistan, Southeast Asia, and so on and so on. Mind you, too, that's where they'd like to test this stuff out as well. Africa's a great test base for testing all these things out on the people, because there's never an outcry about it. And they've trained everybody to think it's just disease-ridden, and that's, whenever you hear about something, oh, well, that's Africa, things just grow faster there, and there's a lot of diseases and so on because of the climate and so on. No, they have all these laboratories there, folks, and it's a great place to release them. Yeah, of course it is. They don't just sit and make all these things and then worship the little test tubes and say, oh, isn't that wonderful? Aren't they beautiful? They test these things out. And since the target is human population, they always use it eventually on humans. We react differently from rats, you see. Stop being so naive, for goodness sake. Stop it. This one here, no time to die. As I've said before many times, we are also the business. And the government in Britain has worked to change the system of consent in England, which permits the removal of organs for transplant. And it says, are you being fully informed of potential consequences? So the government's, even the way it's worded again, it's thinking, well, most folk don't volunteer to donate anymore. So since X amount of them would probably do it if they thought about it, then the government is going to presume you've given consent already. This is where it goes, folks. We are the business. Do you understand the money they make off of this per organ? It's a massive business. Massive, massive business. I said a few years back when Canada did the same, if you went to the hospital in Ontario here, you're automatically down as a donator of organs. Should you die there or go into some kind of coma. Because don't forget, they want to take the organs off you when you're still alive. They'll say, oh, he's brain dead, there's less brain activity, blah, 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 blah. If you go into a hospital now, you got to remember, you got surgeons there, they're looking upon you as a big, big paycheck. Are they going to help you or cut you up and sell you? You better think of these things. This is modern life, and it's not human at all. It's inhumane. It's utterly corrupt. And I'm not saying that folks shouldn't get up plan. I'm just saying, look at the basics of all this stuff here. And how government creeps ahead and creeps ahead and creeps ahead without any consent at all. And the world too is so corrupt. I mean, look at all the things with Oxfam. With orgies, it says. Orgies. Incredible. Massive orgy. And you understand when these everything under the, again, this is aimed at the naive, which is most of the people. You're brainwashed to think that everything is out there that says what it is actually what it is. It's not. It is not. We live in probably one of the most corrupt eras for an awful long time. Awful long time. But Oxford covered up Caligula-style prostitute orgy involving staff and earthquake victims in Haiti. You see the photographs too, the luxury places that these staff, these volunteer staff are working, but they're getting paid big bucks for it too. So that's caused a wee bit of stink. And they'll go to, folk will forget this, no time at all. They always do. And then you have another one, Oxfam too is hit by a second wave of claims because the staff in Chad had sex parties attended by prostitutes on the organization's property, and so on. And you should see the incredible salaries the big characters get and all these things as well. But that is the system, isn't it? That's what we live under. That's what we live under. And then you get another one too, how they work at politics. Politics, you often find, when they're not working in politics, these prostitutes, we call politicians, will work it out to help set some new charity up. And they'll get the government to appoint them as head of the charity, as they rake in millions of bucks for themselves. Well, the Miliband brothers in Britain, two Miliband brothers, whose dad was a top communist, they ran from Europe at the break of World War II, I think it was, and started just preaching communism in Britain. And then they got into politics too in Britain, and did these communists do awfully well. They accumulate an awful lot of wealth, These working, the people who stand up for the working class nonsense, how they end up awfully stinking rich. But anyway, David Miliband, his name is, he hushed up 37 allegations of fraud, sex abuse and bribery. He got put in charge of some big charity company, it says. It's called the International Rescue Committee. And he was put the head of it. And the government, and again, they use your tax money to fund it and all this kind of stuff. But he was given millions in taxpayers' money before the allegations were made. Well, you understand, they're awfully free with your money, but you have no rights at all. You have no rights at all. Everybody is just a slave to these entities that are called governments, that have trained you to believe is all real, and even get argumentative about this party against that party. You actually believe it all. You really do. And it says he's given millions of bucks, or pounds actually, A team from the IRC was sent to probe claims of wrongdoings in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo has been at war forever with different groups and so on, and the dictators that are put in there, as long as they're friendly to the Western powers, who are in there to get the uranium, it's a very high-class uranium, then they leave them alone to slaughter who they want to slaughter. That's how it's done. Here's this character, he gets out of politics, and he gets this set up by the government, your own tax money, to make sure he's got a damn good income in the meantime, working about 30 hours a week, if that, it says here. Near the bottom of the article it says, in the financial year September to 2016, the DFID gave £92 million to the IRC. Not bad, in your tax money. Hey, isn't that not bad, eh? His own salary out of it here too, it's down near the bottom there, try to hide it in the bottom, I think. He was paid an estimate, not bad, this is for the year, £407,000, right, to run this charity, a 2-year New York charity, it says here, that's what it claims, New York-based charity, where he promised to use its donations wisely and efficiently. So he had to work 37.5 hours a week for that. Oh, poor soul, eh? £407,000. Poor how does he manage it? The IRC defended the CEO's salary, they always do, you see. And they always try to say, well, if he worked as a CEO of a corporation, well, if he worked as a CEO of a corporation, let him work as a CEO of a corporation. The whole point of a charity is that it's not a private money-making profit thing and so on, which is a big, big joke. Because when they're in charities, they can give each other whatever kind of salary they want. And most of them do. But can you believe it, though, how they work it all out and how they're going to be so successful after, when in between going in and out of politics? Not bad, eh? It's not bad at all. But that's the system we live in. It's utterly corrupt. Also, too, do you vote for Soros, eh? Now he's out there in the open now. As some kind of superior person, along with Gates now, to run the world. This guy who's been involved in sinking countries through crashing their financial systems and stuff. And having overthrows of countries with colour revolutions. And there he is in the Guardian newspaper now. I think the picture in the back was of him speaking at the CFR, naturally, the Council on Foreign Relations, that help run the world, these private organisations. So he calls on the Economic Union to regulate social media and fight populism. So much for freedom, eh? He doesn't want, he only wants his own system of world government ideas to go through, but anything else, he's trying to get them to regulate by law, their governments to regulate by law, anything else outside this whole globalistic agenda. And how will he do it? He does it too. The guy who behind the scenes has all these different jokers writing articles and appears to be a far left wing papers and so on. He's claiming that voters' minds are being controlled and manipulated by people giving the wrong impressions of stuff. So much for free speech. These guys they can't have you having free speech. They got to ban it. They got to. But again, who voted for Mr. Soros here? Again, what did I say at the start? The people who believe through their riches and their accumulation of wealth, they're the natural elite to rule the world. And this getting back to eugenics, UK treatment of Down syndrome amounts to eugenics that the Synod is told. Because if you notice, there's very few children getting born these days. You don't see somebody with Down syndrome. There's nothing wrong with these people at all. Really. But they've deemed them defective. The elite have deemed them and trained the public to believe they're defective. You'll never meet nicer people than people with Down syndrome. I'm telling you. But everybody's getting advised, you've got to abort them. Yeah. Another one, too, UNICEF, United Nations again, educational community group, the fund, which is really indoctrination of all children across the world from the United Nations. The top children's rights campaigner who led UK's anti-smacking campaign and has been at it, working for them since the 1960s. He was a cheerleader for them. He's now been jailed for raping of a boy 13 years old in the latest Charity 6 scandal. Look at these people, these great champions across the world, and you better you better really look into who they are. They always go to their target, what they want. And they go into all these different organizations when they can get to their targets, naturally. Anyway, he's got 3 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of buggery, and sentenced to 6 years and 8 months in prison. So it's not a speculation, he's been found guilty of all. And his horrific sexual assaults took place over a 3-year period in the 1960s, but have only come to light following a police investigation last year. But this is what they give you as heroes, eh? And again, it always sounds so, oh, what a hero, what a hero. There's very few people out there, I have to really say this, they really are who they say they are. And I mean across the board. Across the board. It isn't just the fronts for all the fake news, and there are real organizations out there that are definitely fake news. Because everything's to control your minds and your opinions and everything else and direct your thoughts. But even what you think you're following, you haven't got a clue that what you're following is also fake as well. If you knew what it was like in the 90s with the alternate media and the incredible variety of very intelligent, well-learned people who are scholars really in their fields have all been annihilated quietly one by one as they present to you with something else that still pretends it's the same organization. It's completely different from it used to be. And the people haven't figured that out yet. That was all intentional. It was planned that way. Sad, isn't it? I said at the very beginning, you have to think for yourselves. People have to think for themselves. If you don't think for yourselves, you're finished. You haven't a chance. A snowflake's chance in hell. Because, if you lose your ability to think and reason, it's utterly finished. Do you understand? They always talk about Germany and the Nazis and so on. And people after the facts, it's always easier after to say, oh, what we should have done to prevent this from happening. But they didn't. And there were so many things happening leading up to World War II in Germany, with the hammering of Germany itself for reparations payments from World War I to keep in poverty. And with countries going over their borders and grabbing their coal whenever they wanted it, which they were doing. I mean, they had to fight. Even top reporters at the Versailles Treaty said that Germany could never do this, that they could never pay this off. And they'd have to either fight their way out of it or starve to death. In other words, it was caused to happen. It was made to happen. But look at the Bolshevik Revolution and the millions of people that followed right through from the Soviet era through the Soviet bloc countries. And the horror stories they have there. 80-odd million people or more killed by their own governments. There's always a few that see it coming and try to tell the rest, but they're too, I don't want you, that's unpleasant, don't say that, we'll be okay, There you go. In the New Age, what do they do in the New Age? They teach them in what's called the New Age movement, never to look at anything that's unpleasant, so they're easy meat. Easy meat. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. The 3 monkeys. And I'll be okay, Really? It's sad but true, but that's how you're trained. And there's lots of folk go along with it. Yet so much could be avoided if people had just spoken out long before it all happened. It could have been completely avoided. And you're seeing the rise of the same totalitarian forces. We've seen it for years now. And really, and when you couple that with the science, because it's all, but don't forget these movements are all socialist movements, and they base everything on science, and they're humanists as well. The pragmatic way, the path of least resistance, situation ethics. Oh, there's only 10 cans of beans left, and there's 15 folk. What can we do, You've seen all the different movies too, haven't you? Lots of movies out right now with that in it. You're all being trained for what's to come, and you'll go willingly say, oh, well, I guess I was just one of the unfortunates, and they're probably right, I'm probably got bad genes, and, no point keeping me alive, yada, yada, yada. What an incredible indoctrination act when they have no problems from their victims. They've trained them to accept their fate. Sad. Horror. I'm Alan Watts from Ontario, Canada, and it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.